So I think I'll start now. First, my name is Michael Kerman with Leading Edge Seminars. I'm in Toronto, and I want to welcome you here to this virtual lunch with Caroline Welch. In the past, and I know now, we have people from all over. So welcome from us to wherever you are, and hoping that this day is going as well as possible in these strange and sometimes difficult times. We started these virtual lunches in March, and we really appreciate the participation of so many people joining. We always have a question and answer period. You know, what we found during this pandemic is that people who watch this are connectors by nature, and we try to leave opportunities for you to ask questions of our guests during our virtual lunches. For all our webinars, we have question and answer periods as well. So let's make this like we're all getting together at the coffee shop and getting to meet a very interesting person. Just to let you know about what's coming up, in terms of our free stuff, we have a town hall where everyone's invited to talk about the things that are on your mind, and we do that monthly at the end of every month. In terms of our workshops, we have Frank Anderson. Of course, he's known for his wonderful work with internal family systems tomorrow. And on Friday, we have a very interesting session on microaggressions, which is something I know Caroline is interested in as well, and you'll hear more about that. And that's with Monica Williams and Matthew Skinta, and that's one of our 3-hour webinars. All our webinars are followed up with more question and answer time with our speakers. You'll hear later about some of the programs Caroline is doing with us, and she's partnering with Ellen Bader, who's certainly well known in the couples therapy field, and Shelley Harrell, who knows a lot about racial trauma, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. Everything we do is archived, so if you sign up for anything, you're going to get a link. So if you can attend, sign up, you'll get that link. If you attend and you want to watch again or refer to a friend or whatever, you will be getting that link later in the day. Emily Porter is on your screen somewhere, and she is our kind of hostess with a mostess in the background. If you have any questions, put them in the chat line. And when we have our question and answer period with Caroline, please feel free just to say in the chat line you have a question for Caroline, and Emily will be watching and coming back on the screen to kind of moderate that question and answer period. So I want to tell you a few things about Caroline Welch, kind of a bio, then I'll introduce her, and then we'll be off with our conversation first, and then your questions later. So first, for those of you who don't know Caroline Welch, she is the CEO and co-founder with Dr. Dan Siegel of the Mindsight Institute, whose mission is to make the science of well-being accessible for both professional and personal development through many programs online and in person. She's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Law School and holds a master's degree in communications from the University of Southern California. She's had a very interesting life, different than many of our presenters in the therapy field, because she was a civil litigator for over 10 years. She was a vice president at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, which is not a therapy company if you weren't too sure, and she served as the production attorney for the Judge Judy show. And before that, after law school, she had a very interesting life, decided to travel, lived in Japan, and really it's her life teachings that kind of led her to the book, which we'll be talking about in a moment. She does have a website, carolinewelch.com, if you want to learn more about Caroline. But really, most importantly, I want to tell you, I read this book, I don't know if you, called The Gift of Presence. The subtitle is A Mindfulness Guide for Women, but really I think it is for everybody. It is such a rich book full of insights, poetry, exercises. I think it's like a few books in one, because the first part of the book really has wonderful and interesting ideas about neuroscience and therapy and how we get along with ourselves and with other people. That's a book in itself before she goes on to the 3 Ps, which is purpose, pivoting, and pacing, which really help us move forward in our lives. The book features exercises that will both entertain and challenge you, and it contains many wonderful stories and great poems. You know, some poems I've heard over the years through friends and at workshops from poets that you may know. Again, to supplement what she has to say. There's much information, stories, and I think she impacts because she knows something about the brain. There's left brain, right brain. You're clicking on many dimensions. I wanted to stay with this book for a while, and it's going to stay with me when I'm looking at my own life and my own pivoting and pacing. Caroline, I want to welcome you to our audience today.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. It's my pleasure to be here and to have my morning coffee with your group. Cheers.
Okay. So in terms of your book, I'd like you to just tell our audience a little bit about it. And also, it features interviews with women from all around the world and about how you found those women and how you put together the idea for this book.
The idea for the book was percolating for a while. As you mentioned, I'm heading up the Mindsight Institute, and part of my job is to go around to amazing conferences and to meet many different speakers and to learn about neuroscience and psychology and the latest science and how it could apply to human behavior. So after a few years of thinking what I might write about, I identified a mindfulness guide for women because I had a long history with mindfulness, having first learned to meditate in Japan at a time when I couldn't speak Japanese. So it was largely just doing the practice. And fast forward this many years, as your audience is likely very aware, there's so much more science and research now that can encourage us and support us in understanding the benefits of mindfulness for us. So it became clear that there would be a space for a book such as the one I wrote because it's a couple of its main features are that it's accessible and it's written by someone who has mindfulness and I'm not spending my life devoted to mindfulness, but I'm using it in my own life and have used it for decades. So I think that's one of the strengths and one of the things that the readers are resonating with.
I'd like you to, since the title is The Gift of Presence, I think presence is so important, and many people watching this are therapists, and all therapists are looking for how to be most effective. And sometimes the search is for new techniques and new ideas, understanding human nature, understanding how to be effective. But it seems to me that being present is probably one of the most effective tools of anyone who wants to influence anyone else and have a relationship, being grounded in center. So tell us about your interest in presence, where some of the ideas came from, and what you see in your life the value of presence is.
Yes, one of the leaders in our field, Jon Kabat-Zinn, with whom I imagine your audience is familiar with his work and the mindfulness-based stress reduction clinics. But one thing he emphasizes is that mindfulness is not a tool, it's a way of life. So I think while many programs, whether it's coaching or business leadership, have a segment on mindfulness as a tool, which of course we could say it is, but it's such a much broader benefit than that and can play such a substantial role in our lives. If we can be present, it is a gift to the title, as the title of the book suggests, a gift, first of all, to ourselves. And I think in our very hectic, overscheduled, overwhelming lives, if we can slow down and take a few moments for ourselves each day, that can set the tone. And it can reset us throughout the day. And there are many informal practices we can do that can bring us that benefit right away. So when I think about, for example, the mental health professionals who are in clinics or who are seeing patients hour after hour, if there could be just a break, a short break, even 30 seconds for that reset, it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate in your book talking about the difference between like the mindfulness practice that takes you on retreats or a monastery or a commitment of an hour a day to the mini mindfulness breaks, just as you're suggesting that anyone can do at any time just to help center themselves. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because you brought it up. And I found it very
Oh,
useful.
what did I say?
You talked about the mini meditations and Sharon Salzberg's 3 Beths. Can you take us through a minute of a mini mindfulness exercise that people right now watching the screen can do with you?
Absolutely. And I'll just put my watch in a place where I can see it so that we limit this to a minute. So the first thing is to get comfortable. And whether you're seated, lying down, or standing, just assume a pose that feels comfortable to you. And avert your gaze if that feels good for you, or close your eyes. And just take a deep breath in and a breath out, being aware of where you might feel the air, whether it's on your nostrils or whether it's your chest rising and falling. And if the breath doesn't work for you, just listen to sounds or look at an object in your space that you like. Whatever it is, know that this is available to you 24/7. It's a free natural resource, and it can be your go-to place. That's a minute and 5 seconds. We should have done a before and after poll to see if this had an impact.
Well, people can, if you want to put something in the chat line, we can have that kind of informal poll, and
Great.
let people can just put in the chat line if they do this or how they found that little exercise.
Yeah, I'll say one thing here, Michael, is that in the women whom I interviewed, I'd always ask them what is most persuasive to them in being faithful to a daily practice, because of course the informal is available to us, but there is also a great benefit in having a more formal practice. And even with all of the science that I've mentioned, we now have, and of course more every day, in the case of many of the persons with whom I spoke, it came down to their personal experience. So whatever that informal practice is that works for you, you can run your own experiment, your own science, if you will, and see how that over a few days, weeks, or months comes to enhance your life.
When you were speaking with these women, had most of them had some kind of mindfulness practice before, or how did you choose which ones to speak to?
I chose the women based on diversity. I wanted to have women around the world, different ethnicities, race, professions or not, working career women or not, with kids or not, ages 16 to 90. And I wanted also women who both do and don't have practices. And one of the surprising things is there were a few women whom I interviewed who would say, oh, just put your computer away. I have nothing to say about mindfulness. I'm the most unmindful person you'll interview. And after talking with a couple of women who would start the interview like that, I would come to learn that they are actually very mindful. They'd say, I don't have a mindfulness practice, but when I go to visit my elderly mother on Tuesdays, I try to be fully present. When I drive there, I can feel my hands on the steering wheel. And when I sit and talk to my mom, I am fully present for her. I'm not on my phone. I'm not looking at emails. I'm not distracted. So that's mindfulness in action. And I think part of the reward in the interviews, and I hope in the book also, is for those who may think that they're not mindful, they can't be mindful, it's daunting to have a practice, that those barriers can be dissipated over time.
You know, as I mentioned, I think the book is so rich. I'd like to spend more time on mindfulness, but I want to go to the 3 Ps because you have some very practical ideas. So I'd like you to speak a little bit about purpose pivoting and pacing, and how you came to these ideas, and just exactly what you mean.
There, believe it or not, was a lot of competition for the 3Ps. I thought long and hard about a structure, if you will, or what would the concepts or actions be that could most of the time help us see our way through something. And so after the interviews and after thinking about the conferences I had attended over the previous 3 years, I was able to distill it to the P's that you've mentioned. Purpose, like presence, is science-based, plenty of research to verify that if we have a purpose in life, we can enjoy the benefits of living longer. We can have optimal levels of the enzyme telomerase to keep our chromosomes in healthy condition, and many others. And again, like presence, purpose is a free resource. And let me take a moment just to define purpose. Purpose arises out of what's important to us, what's meaningful, and it has an impact on others. So it not only arises out of what's important or meaningful to us, but provides meaning to our lives. And so one of the great benefits and features of purpose is that it can get us through the most challenging times, or times that didn't go the way we expected. And one of the examples that comes to mind in my own life, in one of my, when I was still practicing law in a private firm, I would travel a lot. And our son at that time was about 5 years old. And I remember having been away for 2 days, I was coming back and meeting him in the afternoon and so excited, I'm going to take him for a walk and take him around the block and perhaps to the playground. But when I came home, all he wanted to do was sit at the kitchen table and write in his newsprint pad, which he did all the time. And so at first I felt frustrated and like, oh my gosh, I've been away and this is my plan and now it's not working. And then I just stepped back and thought, well, wait, my purpose is to be an available, loving parent. And I'm still on that path. I'm still doing that. And if this is what he wants to do right now, I'll adjust. And it was much easier. I think another example, and maybe relevant to some of those listening to us, because I know in many parts of the world, our kids are learning on Zoom. And so for those parents who are running a classroom in the kitchen, the days can be quite discouraging. But at the end of a given day, if we can remind ourselves, my purpose is still to be here as a resource, as a parent / educational resource for my child. And even though today my child / student was tired or had a tech problem or hated that particular algebra section, I'm still on that path, and that's still my purpose.
Let's move to pivoting. And in terms of your life, you had a number of pivots in your life that probably informed this book. So I'd like you to talk about pivoting and exemplify it by your life.
Pivoting arises out of the larger concept that our lives are change and they are uncertainty. I know when I was writing this section of the book, I walked into the public library in Brooklyn, and there's an inscription in the rotunda about something to the effect of, I finally gave up the flimsy fantasy of certainty and decided to wander. And I thought that was quite well put, because before the pandemic, it was much easier to maintain that fantasy of certainty and permanence, and much easier to forget that so much of life, probably, well, we know most of human life is fleeting. Fleeting events, fleeting feelings. So I thought it would be important to offer a resource for making changes when we need to. And I talk about two kinds of changes. There's crisis pivoting, which we all were called upon to do. For example, when the pandemic hits, or when there's a health crisis or a family matter or a work emergency. These are times when we crisis pivot. But what I'm more interested in is proactive pivoting and coming to understand what would serve me well right now by way of making a change. And that's hard for us because we humans don't like change. But if we can not wait until a change is imminent or forced upon us, which is usually when we make changes, when our company closes or merges or something happens, or a change in our family or our personal situation. But if we can get ahead of a change that we know would perhaps serve us well, that can bring us a lot of well-being and also offer us many more options often to be able to make a proactive change rather than to wait when our actions might be more limited.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned wandering. I'm a big believer in the value of wandering. It's so much of life we're told to be purposeful, but I found some of my best experiences is when I just wander and let things happen. You've done some wandering too. So tell us about what you think the value of wandering is and what we and clients can learn about wandering.
Yes, I think we have so many set paths and expectations that guide us. And for whatever reason, one of my friends thought maybe I was such a keen wanderer because I had grown up on a dairy farm where you don't wander off the farm because there is so much work to do. You don't go on vacation because the cows need to be milked twice a day. So his theory was that this 18-year period of that great stability kind of launched me into the world, where my first trip was to Shiraz, Iran. I've always been interested in other countries, other cultures, what is out there. And so the wandering, as you're suggesting, Michael, can lead us to unexpected things. I was in graduate school at USC, and mostly in graduate school because I was desperate. I didn't know what to do when I graduated from college, and all I knew was school. So I applied for more school. And I got into a very fun master's program, which was then what led me to an English teaching job in Japan. And as unlikely as that trajectory is, what happened is that I was on the campus one evening and I saw a sign that said, "Study in Japan." So I went to the meeting and the professor said, "Well, you're a graduate student. This is for undergrads. But if you want to go to Japan and work, I'll get you a job there." And I said, "Fine." And that was it. So off I went to Hiroshima, Japan. I wasn't a lawyer then, but I read the contract carefully, and it said if I gave them 30 days notice, I could leave. So I thought, well, that's perfect. I can endure anything for 30 days. But I didn't expect to leave, but at least I felt I could if I needed to. And fast forward, I stayed 3 years and learned so much while I was there. And to this day, some of the ideas and the cultural features of the Japanese are with me, one of which I describe in the book. It's a concept called yutori, which actually kind of moves to our third P of pacing. Yutori means the space or the transition that we put between events. And I say we put loosely because at least before I became familiar with yutori, I would pretty much book myself hour to hour and put a lot into one day. But with the benefit of appreciating yutori more, I've come to try to arrive early for events, which the women whom I interviewed in Japan said, now you might think that's wasted time, but that's not wasted time. We need that time so we can see, okay, get our minds around what it is that we're walking into next. Is it from work to the family, or is it from one meeting to the other? All these transitions that all of us are making all day can be done more seamlessly, if you will, if we build in the benefit of these buffers or these moments. Not to mention that this also serves the very Japanese value of not disrespecting others and not being late for an engagement.
Mhm. I was interested just to move to pacing because a lot of times people ourselves or people in therapy can talk about changing something or pivoting, but the concept of pacing in a very thoughtful, mindful way, I found very, very useful looking at my own life and the kind of things I'm thinking about doing. So I'd like you to help define pacing and how it would be useful for people to think about this.
Pacing arose out of the interviews and also looking at my own life, and it boils down to not only the pace at which we live a day, but looking at our whole lifespan. And as hopefully many who are listening have experienced, we have longer health spans now than ever before. So if we can identify what life chapter we're in, that can help us peel away what might be able to wait or what isn't so important. And that's an exercise that I think we often don't take time to do. And I was pretty aware of pacing, even from the time that I went, for example, made the decision to go to Japan. I felt this is the time in my life to go to another country and live. I didn't have family responsibilities that kept me in the US. And I also thought later, as I became more entrenched in a career, I wouldn't have the opportunity to go and have that kind of experience. So part of it is doing now what we can't do later. Or I have many friends who have become new grandparents, but at the same time, they have their own careers or new careers or fourth careers. So they're kind of tapering down some parts of the career that they believe they can rev up a bit later because the grandchild is whatever age only at this time. And so these are the adjustments I think that can be facilitated by taking that time to pace ourselves. And I'll just add one more thing to that, which is, and I think maybe the clinicians would perhaps find this useful with some of their clients. The basic question that we can ask ourselves when it comes to pacing, because pacing actually is in part, pacing gets hectic because we've said yes too many times. And there's wisdom in knowing what to delete from our schedules or what to say no to. And one easy, straightforward technique is to ask, is it a pebble, a rock, or a boulder? Is the problem in front of you, or is the responsibility you're being asked to take on to head up a department, to take 3 more patients right now, to move to another city, is that for you? Is that a really big boulder type in your life or not? And the other thing I often find is that we accept responsibilities because we think, oh, you're asking that I chair that committee or organize that family reunion in 7 months or next summer. I got that. That's no problem. I can do that. But fast forward, look at your own life right now. Could you do it right now? Probably not. But somehow we think we're going to have more time later. And we think that by that time, when that time rolls around, we'll actually be able to do it. And often it becomes a crunch for us. So this simple, pebble rock boulder, which came out of, actually, I have a dear friend and neighbor who at the time was in 3rd grade, and she invited me to go to one of her class presentations. And her teacher was emphasizing prioritizing that day. And it also happened to be when I was writing about pacing. So I thought, oh, that's great. I think I should share that.
When we talked about you doing a webinar, you said to me, I would like to co-present with some interesting people. And you're going to do a session with Ellen Bader and another session with Shelley Harrell on the topics of couples therapy and racial trauma. So it'll be interesting for me and the audience to learn what you saw the connection between all your incredibly interesting ideas and those topics, and how you could join with them in ways that would be interesting and relevant to people. And I'll also mention before you answer, we're going to open up for questions pretty soon. So if anyone watching has a question, put it in the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. So.
Yeah, let's start with the presentation that I'll be sharing with Professor Shelley Harrell. She is a Black American professor at Pepperdine, and she has worked for decades in the trenches on both soulful mindfulness, which she'll tell us more about when we meet her, and anti-racism. And I think I mentioned to you, Michael, that once the protests began, and there were protests here in Santa Monica, I was, from that moment forward, on a mission and made it my purpose to be an anti-racist, which I know now is a lifelong journey. And I know now, persons of color or not, we are all carrying racism and bias. That's why when there's a interesting, I think it's a YouTube clip by a Black American professor at Stanford, and she boarded a plane with her young son. And he looked around the plane, all white people aside from himself and his mom, and he said, "Wow, mommy, there was there was a Black man in the front." And he said, "Wow, mommy, I hope that Black man is not going to rob this plane." And mom said to son, "Wow, why do you think that might happen? Doesn't he look just like daddy?" And he said, "Yeah, but I'm worried." So I just bring this story because of the images we see, the training we've had, what we see, what we've experienced. And I think a researcher in this field, Kendi, has also done a beautiful job of helping us understand more about racism and bias. And the final thing I'll say for now, as you can tell, this is a topic of great interest to me, but I was an exchange student at Grambling University, which is one of our historically Black colleges in Louisiana. And I was one of 4 whites on the campus of 4,000 Blacks. And so that was a beautiful experience, and I'll get into it more at the seminar. But the point is that when I thought about racism since that time, which was the 70s until now, so many decades later, I would think to myself, well, of course, I'm not racist. I went to a Black college. But what I'm realizing is I too have work to do. And there is this white fragility concept, and there is a book by the same name which points out the idea that we as whites it's such a trigger for us, at least in the United States. It's one of the worst things you can say to someone, to call them racist. And a real go-to response is, I'm not racist, I have an Irish background and we really suffered, or I'm Jewish and we have the Holocaust. Name your background and we get defensive and we can't face it head on. So I think, you know, books such as those by Wilkerson, the book called Caste, which likens the US system to what occurred in Nazi Germany and the caste system in India. These all are such valuable resources for all humans, because I think what's becoming so clear to us is that we're all very interconnected.
Okay, yeah, that cast book kind of is amazing. So let's just move on to couples therapy and mindfulness and what the connection you see is. And then we'll open for questions after this.
Yeah, well, to start with Dr. Ellen Bader, she has been a dear friend and colleague for years. And I first met her in a couples therapist think tank that Harville and Helen Hendricks put together. And they gathered together several couples therapists, the Gottmans and others whose work I imagine you would be familiar with. And so that was the first time I met Ellen, but we've always enjoyed exploring the latest ideas in the world of mental health. And we've enjoyed hearing about what work, because like us, or like Dan and myself, she works with her husband and they are both life and work partners. So we have a long conversation going. So when it came to selecting a therapist with whom I might have a conversation, Ellen was my first choice. And happily, she said yes. We were actually to speak at a couples conference that she and Jeff Zeig host every year in Northern California. And then when the pandemic hit, of course, that together with so many conferences had to be postponed. So Ellen and I will be able to have a discussion about how the 3 Ps look, not only in the life of the mental health professional or whatever profession you're in, how is identifying your purpose and using the pivoting and pacing, what does that look like for you as a therapist? How can that help you to have more, have more resiliency and more energy for the work, which is very challenging? And then in turn, how can that be shared with the client? Mm-hmm. So that they too have a very quick, the 3 Ps, let me just kind of run through those. And all of this with the foundation of mindfulness and being aware of what's going on. And I know Ellen will talk about her specialty is couples therapy, as many of you know. And she'll talk about the concept of pacing, for example, with respect to what happens in the therapy process. Yeah. Like you can't go too fast for the relationship or for either of the 2 members of the relationship. And I, when she mentioned that to me and we were preparing for our seminar, I thought about my days as a mediator. And when I would mediate cases, it was also, pacing was also important there, because if you're trying to mediate, as in settle a case, you don't want to start with how much will you pay and how much will you pay kind of place. We're not there yet. And if we go too fast before we hear from both sides about what's really important and what's at stake, then we might get to what seems like the end, but it's not. And then you have to do a little retracting. So I think the pacing together with the purpose and pivoting will unfold in ways that not only mental health professionals, but their clients will be able to use.
Okay, well, I've been hogging the spotlight, which I guess is what I'm doing, but I'd like to open it up. If you have any questions, you can either let Emily know in the chat box, or if you'd rather write something, if you don't want to appear in the screen, and then Emily will come on and help us out. Emily.
All right, so our first is an anonymous question, and they just wanted to know if your book would be inappropriate for a 17-year-old.
Absolutely. Yes. And let me add to that, also appropriate for men. And I want to commend Michael for not being scared of the title. But in seriousness, let me say that when I have workshops and the title is usually for women, I get men in the room, and when I say, why did you choose this workshop, and they'll say, well, I want to understand my partner, or I have two nieces, or I have female students in my classroom, I have female patients or clients. So I chose to write with women in mind just because of the unique challenges we face as women, and I'll be talking more about that in my seminar. But I want to emphasize to the question, Emily, all ages, men and women.
Great. Alex asks, do you experience a fear of death sometimes, and how do you deal with that fear?
You know, that's a great question. And fortuitously, I was listening to a rabbi, Steve Leader, and I highly recommend his lectures to you, and in particular to Alex, if you're interested in death. I believe this was a Yom Kippur lecture he gave about 2 or 3 years ago. But what he chose to share in that lecture was how he looked at the Jewish holiday or holy day of Yom Kippur as a rehearsal for death. And he then shared about 10 things with the audience on what he's learned about death, having been at hundreds of deaths. Most of us in our lifetimes will be at a handful. And so the first thing he said was he never met anyone who was dying who was afraid of death. He said, fear of death is reserved for the living. It's anxiety. And he said, by the time we come to that place of our deaths, what he has seen at the deathbed is it's like falling into your bed at the end of an exhausting day. And it feels so good and it's peaceful.
Lara just wanted if you could repeat the book you referenced about couples therapy.
I'm thinking about the book I referenced about couples therapy. I don't know what I referenced. Ellen Bader's book, perhaps?
I feel that might have been the one.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. And then Gwen asks, is the idea of the pebble rock boulder that you use, is this image to determine the amount of commitment being requested?
Yes, it does. It helps you assess how big is this job and how does it fit with what I have. And the thing I would add here because of this question is that sometimes one of my students pointed out to me, well, I realize now this person had a particularly large challenge in her life. And she said, I realized the reason this is weighing on me is that when I accepted this responsibility, it was a pebble. And now it has grown into a boulder. So I think even assessing along the way what a given responsibility has become is also very helpful to us.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but if anyone just wants to wave or unmute. Oh, Samia, did you want to ask your question? Okay, I can read it. In your experience and the others that work with you when doing couples therapy, how do you manage pacing what couples need to process in order to improve their relationship?
Well, I get to move that question to Ellen Bader at the time of our meeting, because as Michael mentioned, I am not a therapist by training. I'm a lawyer, and I am also CEO of our institute here, where we actually do a lot of online education. And as Dan Siegel always says, we don't have a form of therapy, we inform therapy. But that being said, I just want to say that I wouldn't be able to answer that, but I am very sure that Ellen would be very happy to answer that at the time of our seminar.
I see Lara has unmuted. Lara, did you have a question?
Oh, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing. I really like the fact that you touched on anti-Black racism, because I think that's very, very timely. And that's something that I think as clinicians, we need to be aware that is impacting people differently. I also appreciated like the conversation about Ellen's book. Are you able to provide her last name? Because I'm sure I butchered it.
Yes, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I'll send you a message with it.
Thank you.
Emily, just to be, just maybe something we can do offline, but I want to make sure that I'm providing the book that was asked for. So maybe we'll have a quick look at the transcript at some point
for sure.
to see what it was. And I apologize that I can't immediately pull that up.
That's okay. And
Okay,
I'll send Lara, I'll make sure I'll send you an email with the title.
Great.
Who else has questions? Oh, Lara's hand's up. That's okay.
I can ask a question in the meanwhile, Emily.
Yep.
Oh, well, someone's asking, how do you spell Ellen Bader? Is, well, it's Ellyn, B like in boy, Ader, Ellen Bader. I'm wondering how this current period of time, the pandemic, is affecting you and the people of the Mindsight Institute, and what you're learning from this experience, and how people might best prepare for this. Everyone in Canada is talking about the second wave, the possibility of being isolated again back at home, and what learnings you've had and thoughts you have about how we prepare for this next stage.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for that question, because I think it is top of mind. And we actually here now in the United States are having a second wave in New York and other hot spots. So I think we have to focus on this. How is it affecting me? I feel my mind is on furlough. So try as I might to have my to-do list and get through it. And having now 8 months of pandemic, like many of you, I had these projects that I would do. I haven't gotten to them. And I was trying to understand this from what we know about human behavior in our brains. And one of the things we know is that our brains love to detect patterns. And that means certainty. And that means then our behavior can be guided. But when there's so much uncertainty, we're kind of out at sea. And so this is one of the lessons in all of this, is that this is a crash course in mindfulness for us. The one thing we can take control of is our chosen response to the events. We can't control the course of the virus. We can't control whether others wear masks or not. We can't control what our world leaders choose to do or say. We can't control how we feel, but we can control how we choose to relate to these things. And so that's where our power comes and our control, whether it's a pandemic or another kind of challenge in our lives.
Elaine says that she has a client who has a dream that she wants to achieve and sees this as her purpose in life. However, she's running out of time to realize her dream and is not sure how to live her life without purpose if she can't realize her dream. Do you have any suggestions for her?
So let me just clarify that. Is this, and first let me say that I think there's quite a bit of research now on how all of our dreams have been impacted by the pandemic. And I have not read any of it, but this may be a rich area for those of you who are hearing from clients that their dreams are of a certain nature. And I think one of the first things with that, of course, is some of the work of Kristen Neff with the common humanity and the self-compassion for all of us to realize we're not unique in this. We all have these disturbed dreams right now. But for this specific question, and I believe it has to do with this person believing she cannot live with her purpose or without it, or do you know, Emily, what is the clarification?
Let's see if we can get Elaine.
Yeah.
Elaine, are you there? Or if we can get a little more detail. Hi, Elaine.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Elaine.
Yes, I'm sorry. What was your question?
Yes, could you tell us your question?
Yeah, this is not related to the pandemic at all. I just have a client who is dealing with some infertility issues and feels like she's running out of time in her late 30s. And that's her dream, and everything seems to revolve around that. Like her career doesn't really have meaning, except she hopes to have a good job to provide for a family. But otherwise, it doesn't seem to have a lot of meaning to her. So I'm just, hopefully she can realize her dream, but she was just saying to me last week that she doesn't know what her purpose in life would be without realizing this dream of having a child and a family and all that. So
I see. Okay. Well, starting by saying I'm not trained as a therapist, the first thing I could offer is that there are many different kinds of families, and that infertility and whether or not our bodies cooperate with us in our lifetime is something we don't have control over, but there are things we do have control over. And I'll just give you the quick example of one of my colleagues, a lawyer friend. She turned 40 or 42, I believe, had not found her love, but perhaps like your client, very keen to have a family. So she adopted two Chinese girls from mainland China. And so I'm not saying that that's for everyone, but I am saying that we can make family. We can, nieces, nephews, neighbors, they can be our family. And as close as family, because they're our chosen family. And so we don't need to get into families, real families and dynamics, but I guess, Elaine, I just encourage you to support her and consider if, again, these are the expectations like that she's putting on herself that are on top of whatever the uncertainty or the infertility brings. This could be also in part a situation where she's piling on even more anxiety, so that as you likely know, isn't conducive to becoming pregnant. So
right.
Very complicated, but I would think there would be many things that might be supportive to your client.
Okay, right.
I hope that helps you.
Yes, yeah, actually I was kind of thinking along that line. So yes, thank you very much.
Of course.
Alrighty, and next, Bern?
You're right, it's Bern.
Okay. Hi, Bern.
Hi. So the question, I ended up in conversation last evening in regards to intention and as it relates to mindfulness and the life of intention. And when you talked about taking a moment to be able to be, to just be, and a minute and 5 seconds taking you to a particular place. The life of intention, and the comments were coming from Wayne Dyer, I think, but it was around how do we live our lives, and do we live our lives? Is it something that we strive for, or something that we live? And the difference, the distinction is really important, you know, and I think that mindfulness, in the way that we're talking about it, really lives the moment, and the life of intention is how we live those moments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it resonates very much if you look at presence or mindfulness, mindful awareness as being present, not living in the past, your imagined perfect past, regretting, and not striving and projecting into your imagined future that will never come to be. The more we can spend time in the present, the quieter our chatterbox minds become. The more we engage our side sensory circuits, our chatterbox, that mainline dialogue that's always going, those reruns, half of our thoughts are wandering mind, not being present. And then within that half, we have 90% reruns, and they all star one person, us. So the more we can step out of that and be present, the more we can enjoy our well-being.
Thank you.
And I think we have time for one last question. Janet, do you want to take us out?
Yes, that would be great. You can hear me, eh?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Caroline, how have you liked your mind being on furlough, and what is emerging out of this present condition for you?
Thank you. I don't like my mind being on furlough, but I accept it. And I think this is one of the key things of mindfulness. When we try to accept and allow whatever is, doesn't mean we have to like it. We just accept it. So I feel like it has strengthened my mindfulness practice. It has slowed me down. For example, I happen to have an office not so far from my home, about 1.5 miles. And I used to just ride my bike to my office on days when I thought I had time. Now I ride every day.
Mm-hmm.
I just take that time. And
Yeah.
it's about a 20-minute ride each way. So I think these changes, and it'd be fun, maybe in one of our seminars, we'll hear some of these changes that are in the room, because as many downsides as there are, and there are many, especially for frontline healthcare workers and so many others who don't have a choice about whether they have to go out to work and can't work virtually. I think it would be great to count our blessings and look at what we're grateful for and what we've learned.
Yeah. Can I say something more? Just a little bit? Because I'm not alone in this, but for me, there has been this bonus of COVID in the lack of events and ordinary meetings with friends that you love dearly. You can't do it anymore. So you've got a blank appointment book, and it's heaven. And I'm also retired, so I was starting to get into that slowing down and doing things more slowly and being more attentive to what is possible in the day. And I think that when we get older, we start to get a little bit better. Well, I'm speaking for myself. I get a little bit better as I get older. So it has been really, in some ways, divine.
And I think you're in good company, Janet. Half of our world is introverts, and they are secretly happy right now. Yes, so you should enjoy this. We finally come around to your way of being.
Yes, as long as you don't suffer from survivor guilt.
Yeah, no, we'll see. Yes, exactly. Or thriving. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. Thriving. So enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yes, Janet Cleghorn, thank you very much. It's a wonderful note to end on. I just want to say a few things before I say goodbye. First, Caroline, thank you so much. I mean, this has been such an interesting hour. And for everyone watching and everyone who watches this later, because you've registered, we're going to offer a discount for the 2-session Caroline's doing. And also because this topic of racial trauma is so important, and especially for people who aren't not of color, or maybe for everyone, the whole question of microaggressions and just learning so much about how we speak and how we listen, especially as therapists. We have this session on Friday with Monica Williams and Matthew Skinta, so we're going to offer a discount on that as well. So I want to thank everyone for attending and being together with Caroline today. I really enjoyed the questions. There are many of them. I apologize to those people who we didn't get around to, but we want to honor our 1-hour time limit. Again, you're going to get a link. You're going to get another message for us if you want to have a look or if you missed something. So thanks again for being here. We hope to see you on the screen again sometime in some way, and have a great day wherever you are.